Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the System 2 podcast. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Nina, who has a number of projects, but at the core, she practices functional medicine at Denver Integrative Health. She's also co-founder of Milky Baby, infant formula company, and as well as Anava Health. You're involved in a bunch of different things, but before we get into the work side of it, Nina, tell us a little bit more of your story.
Hi, Matei. Thanks so much for having me on. I'm really excited about it. My story, I mean, it's a huge question. I'm sure most of your guests say that. For me, it is such a cross section of so many different things. I'm originally South African, but of Greek descent. I was born and raised in South Africa, but within a very small Greek community there. Was there until I was 19, where I started college and then realized that both my life and my studies and everything that I was raised believing was very limited, and I want to expand that. So I moved to Europe and I was in London for a while, and then later immigrated to North America and was in Canada and the States for the last 20 years, where I've been predominantly. And I would say my story is a mix of all of that background, where I've got a lot of immigrant roots, both in terms of South African and in terms of Greek, and then just exploratory. And now being in the States, I've taken on a lot of American values, both in how I live, in my family, and in my work. Have kind of a cross section of all of that.
Say more about what it was like growing up in South Africa in this Greek community. And it's interesting. Obviously, there are immigrant communities throughout the world, and you were even in your country of birth, you were in a sort of immigrant community, and then you yourself became an immigrant. So say more about what it was like finding that home and that relationship to your country of birth, as well as Greece, the country that your ancestors came from.
That's actually a really interesting question because it was really mixed. We grew up in a very small community being and very Greek centralized. I went to a Greek school. All our family and friends around us were Greek, but we were raised in apartheid South Africa and in Johannesburg, which was one of the most one of the most, I would say, difficult cities in South Africa, and where apartheid was really, really prominent and seen and segregated. So there was a feeling of a lot of segregation within the expanded South African community, but then we were this very isolated, small population within that, too, being this Greek population within that. I would say we had a really happy childhood in that we were very close to the community, but it was very, very isolated and very protected within this bigger frame of apartheid. And I think that's one of the things that was hard for me to leave, in that we had such a close knit, protected community. But it was really the thing that motivated me to leave ultimately, because it was so close and so protected, and South Africa was so segregated. And it just felt like I didn't have freedoms in anything that I did as an immigrant, as a woman in a Greek community, as someone from a very small minded community. I felt that I didn't have the choices in my life, in the things I believed, in the way I worked, in how I worked, and opportunities in all of that, which is why I left.
How did your family end up in South Africa from Greece? What was that story?
So, my grandparents in the 1950s, there was a depression in Greece and a recession, and they found opportunity to work in South Africa because there was a huge gold rush going on in South Africa. And my grandfather was in textiles, so not even anything related to any major commerce, but he had a textile facility and moved that to Johannesburg because there was opportunity to do that there. So just a really typical immigrant story. And then none of them could speak English. They arrived in Africa and created another factory, a textile factory, where they built business. So it was a very typical story.
And did that That factory, the textile factory, was that did your parents end up working there? Was it, did it become a family business, or was it to get replaced with other things as you guys established roots in South Africa?
It got replaced with other things. Actually, interestingly enough, my grandfather built that, sold it in a very small way, and then got involved in antiques, which our extended Greek family in Greece was still involved in antiques and actually still have antique stores in Athens now. So he started antique stores in Johannesburg, and my dad and my grandfather used to travel back to Europe often and buy antiques and then bring them to South Africa and import them. And that kind of became their secondary business after that. And then later than that, my dad he got involved in food products and CPG and was transferred via a big South African company called Nando's from Johannesburg to California. So was involved in many different areas of commerce, really.
And when you say antiques, is it things that are 50, 100 years old, or is it going back to Greek antiquity and you guys were selling things from the ancient times?
Both. So I remember growing up with ancient coins all over the place. So for Greek ancient coins. And then, from the 1800s, 1700s, we had a couple pieces from the 1600s. So it kind of spanned many different eras, but there were a lot of ancient Greek things too.
That's so cool. Did you ever growing up with all that history,
Hmm.
were you into history? Like, was there what did it feel like to have all those artifacts in your houses
Very
or
much so.
stores?
I mean, I think like any typical teenager, when you're surrounded by something, want the opposite. So we were raised in antiquities and old furniture everywhere all over the place, which now I have a true appreciation for. And we were taught the history, we understood the history. But as a child, all I wanted was modern, modern home, modern furniture. But it was really amazing being part of that. And now for me, some of the most special things I own are from my grandparents that have been passed down that do have that history and, are really meaningful both from a family point of view, but also from just their individual history of where they've been passed down through in the world. And now Colorado.
That's so cool.
Hmm.
Say more about that small, tight knit Greek community in South Africa and how, on one hand, it was your refuge. You mentioned that your grandparents or parents, your grandparents didn't speak English when they got there, but at the same time, it was also restrictive to you. What was that like? And when you finally decided to leave, was it relatively easy? Or did your family make it more difficult for you to do that? So, like, what are the sort of pros and cons of growing up in such a community?
I think the pros were the closeness and were the immense love, great support, great protection. And that's not just from our parents, but grandparents, uncles, aunts, friends. I mean, every Sunday, somebody in the community would host a Sunday lunch, and about 40 different people would arrive for lunch, and everybody would bring food. And it was a huge gathering every single Sunday that we just thought was normal. And it was normal at the time. But now in my American life and all the adult life, I see what a rarity that was and how special that was to have that kind of close knit community. And I think because it was so much a part of our childhood, I didn't realize how unique it was. And only see that now that I've left. Leaving was hard on one hand because of all those bonds. And I was really the first to leave from the community. And most of my friends and most of our family are still there, still living that same life. But on the other hand, I had been studying medicine in South Africa, had got into 2 years into studying medicine. I had realized it wasn't really what I wanted to do in the way I wanted to do it, and found a similar course in the UK that offered much more of what I was looking for. So transferred from Johannesburg to London. And so I had that excuse, if it will, that I was going to college. It was an easy out. My parents were devastated. They supported me and they let me do it. But I think my mom cried for 3 years. And she still reminds me of that. So the actual move was easy because I had a reason, but hard emotionally, I think.
Wow. And the reason, what was it that you were seeking in London from an educational perspective? Like, did you already have a sense of the type of medicine that you wanted to study? How did you know what was out there, and how did you know you'd find it in London?
I mean, I use the word kismet a lot, and it was definitely a feeling of kismet in that I felt it was destined because I had studied pre-med. In South Africa, the medical studies are structured a little differently to how they are in the States, in that you don't do an undergrad in general sciences, you go straight into medical sciences from the beginning. And I had done 2 years and realized that the way conventional medicine is structured and the studies are structured, it doesn't really answer the questions that are important to me, in that why people get sick. Um, Truly, what are we treating when people get sick? Not just an array of symptoms, but actually the cause of their disease and where it's coming from. And the way it's taught in conventional medicine, it wasn't really answering those questions. So the Kismet part came in that my dad was going to London on a business trip. I was feeling quite disillusioned with my studies and with medicine. And he said to me, just come with me for 10 days. I'm going to London. I've got work to do, but just come with. And I did. And a friend of mine was studying homeopathic medicine and naturopathic medicine at a school there. And I contacted her. We had been to high school together and she was going to class. And she said, just come sit in a class with me. So I did. And in that lecture, it answered all the questions that I was looking to answer. And I decided right then and there I needed to go to the school. I went and applied that day without telling my parents that I had done so. By chance, spoke to the dean. They had already started the semester and were 10 days in, but she had an opening. I managed to find a way to get myself a scholarship, and within a week had transferred out of South Africa and into school in London. So it all happened really quickly and I
Wow.
think was meant to be. And that was the beginning of my journey.
Wait, okay, say more about that class. What was it that resonated with you so much?
It was a class about homeopathic principles, and the principles really are about root cause medicine and whole body medicine, not looking at the body as a series of symptoms that we have to suppress or just treat, but rather seeing them as expressions of imbalance within the body that can come from many different things. So the way I like to see it now is that the body's an engine, like a car engine. And when the red light comes on our dashboard, we don't just stick a band-aid on the red light. We open the hood, we see where the issue is, and we treat that, and then the light goes off. And that lecture kind of explained that symptoms are just an expression of something else going on in the body. And they can come from many different places, whether it's physical issues, diet and lifestyle, emotional issues, past traumas, genetic factors, things passed down over generations. And it just made sense to me that these imprints are really just an expression of something much deeper going on. And that it was the first time that somebody had, or a school or a lecturer had kind of explained it in that way. And I was like, okay, this is what I got to do. And he really said that as doctors or practitioners or people practicing, we have to be like health detectives, where we go into a person's full history to understand where their imbalance or disease comes from. And that resonated. I was like, all right, this is where I'm supposed to be. Yeah.
And from that one lecture, you then went on this rampage, and in a week, you got yourself a spot there and a scholarship to pay for it. Was that typical for you as a child? Were you able to, like, always go out solving these problems on your own? Or was this, yeah, just you found yourself in a strange land and no one else to rely on and you had to figure it out?
The latter, definitely. As I said, growing up in that very protective community and much more of a patriarchal society. We were told what was best for us and kind of given the structure of where we should go and what we should do. My parents were very unusual in that they didn't practice conventional ways of being. They were Greek, but they followed an Eastern spiritual path that we were raised within our whole lives. They meditated. We were raised vegetarian in a Greek community, which was really, really unusual. And my grandmother constantly thought we were going to die because we were vegetarian. And we found out on her deathbed that she would feed us meat secretly at her house. And she swore that that's why we were alive.
Wait, how did you find this out on her deathbed? Like, she confessed, or what
She
happened?
confessed it to my dad. She said every Friday night when the grandkids came, I'd give them spaghetti bolognese and it had meat, and that's why they are alive.
I love it. What was her reason of saying this to your dad? Just to be like, when I'm not here, you got to keep sneaking in meat, or what was the point of
I
it?
think it was more out of an act of pride, like your children are alive because of me and you should be thanking me. So it was more because from that route. And also I think to kind of reinforce that they survived and did great because they ate meat. There wasn't a reason for them not to, you know?
Yeah. Oh, I love
So
that. That's so
we had a
great.
lot of different things going on. And that was really what I mean, it was difficult to leave and to do it that quickly, but that's why I really believe it was destiny. I was meant to be on this path and meant to go down this road, and it happened as it was supposed to.
What did your dad say when he's off at work in London and you come back and is like, I got something to tell you? Like, what's their reaction?
He was like, well, he knew how unhappy I was at school. And he was like, well, if you can work out a way, I'm open to it. And I mean, emotionally, I think my parents, it was really hard for them to let me go, but they also knew that it was the best path for me. And having this easy in a way, getting into school, finding the path, getting the scholarship, and all of it lining up so quickly, I think they understood that there was no choice but for me to go. So he was really supportive. My mom was much more hesitant. As I said, she cried and cried and cried. And then eventually, well, within a couple days, accepted it and let me move.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so did you went back home to South Africa after you got in, and then
Hmm.
you moved back? Okay. And anyways, what was that like? You go from this very small Greek community to now you're by yourself in London.
Hmm.
What was that
Hmm.
like?
For me, it was exhilarating. I mean, it was really exhilarating coming from a very sheltered community where it wasn't safe to even ride bicycles on the street. And we couldn't even do that growing up in a very dangerous and difficult community of Johannesburg. To then arriving in London, my dad, we went back to South Africa, got my stuff, moved me back into the dorms. He dropped me off, and that was it. And school had already started. And I remember sitting and looking at the map of the tubes and trying to work out the tube system and how I was going to move around. I'd never used public transport before. And just feeling completely exhilarated with the feeling of freedom and that I could go and do anything I wanted in this amazing city. It was the best years of my life for sure.
How did
It was
you
amazing.
end up finding friends or finding another community? Was that easier or harder than you thought it was going to be?
It was much harder than I thought it was going to be. I mean, I had the friend that introduced me to this course, and her and I became really, really close. And she was also from Johannesburg, also Greek descent. So we had a lot in common, and we were best friends throughout college. But beyond that, it was difficult, I'd say, for the first year, because London, as you know, is a melting pot of so many different cultures and people, and it's also huge. So I mean, I was very entrenched in school and very, very committed to that. So that was really my focus. But besides my friend Marilena, I didn't really have a huge community to begin with. And that grew over the years. I think, like most college kids, it grows. But the first year was difficult from that point of view. Yeah.
And okay, so now you're in London, you're taking these classes in exactly the domain that you're interested in. What happens when you graduate? You mentioned you moved to Canada, then the US. What was that? What led you to leave London?
Couple things. I went back to South Africa after graduating and was there for 6 months and realized that it was as small as I had left it. And as great as that was to see my family and to see my high school friends, it just felt very tiny, both in how people thought, in the way people lived, that stuff hadn't changed much since I had left in high school. And I just felt it was time to expand my horizons. At the same time, the man I had been dating in college, the last year of college, had moved to Canada and was in Vancouver. And him and three of his friends had all left London and were living in Canada. And he said, "Come to Vancouver." And being 24, I was like, "Okay, I'm coming to Canada." Jumped on a plane and moved to Canada. There wasn't much more to it than that.
What
Yeah.
did your parents think of that?
They were very unhappy with that. So after 6 months of being back, I think they had hoped that I would stay. My mom tells me now that she knew once I had originally left South Africa, I'd never really be back. And that was kind of the truth of it. Left and was then in Canada for 3 years. The parents weren't happy, but at the same time, they had this job opportunity to transfer to California. And they did that a year later. So it almost forced them to immigrate too, which I think in the greater sense of things is was much better because we're all in Colorado now. And after all darting around and moving around, many different chapters to our immigrant story have all landed up here.
What about professionally? What kind of job did you end up getting? Was it easy, hard to find work in Canada?
I mean, Canada, it wasn't hard actually. It's in Vancouver, it's a very open minded community. They have a lot of functional medicine, naturopathic medicine is very well accepted in Canada. And when I arrived there, I got a job in a integrative pharmacy as a consultant there and practiced both homeopathy and consulted with them at this pharmacy. That ended up being a pretty remarkable job and really helpful job. I became very integrated and integral in that system. The problem was that 3 years in, the boy and I broke up. And he wanted to travel, and I was ready to discover more of my roots. I had never really explored my Greek roots. So I moved to Greece, where I had learned of this homeopathic master who owns and works from an island, whose name is George Vithulkas. And he has a homeopathic pharmacy, he has a school, and basically the whole island, this tiny island in Greece, is very homeopathically minded. So I decided to go and do an internship with him for a year and move to that island for a year, which was really incredible. And so the Canadian chapter was great, but it didn't go very far professionally because I moved again.
So wait, tell me more about that island. What was that like?
I mean, that was a dream. I mean, you're living on a Greek island. I was studying homeopathy. I was working at the school. Was living basically off the land and Greek food. Had a little, what we call in Greece, a papaki, like a little Vespa that you ride around the island. Had this tiny room off this little port off one of the island ports that I stayed in, and it was a dream. I mean, it was really a dream. When winter came and everybody leaves the island in winter, I was devastated because my year was up, but it was a dream life for that time.
What were some of the things that you were learning, and how did the nutrition play a role into it? It sounds like even the lifestyle is more active than in some of these,
Mhm.
when in Canada or elsewhere. What are some examples of things that you came across and learned?
I think it's actually really interesting because I talk a lot to my patients about this today, in that medicine and health really is pretty simple. But humans have overcomplicated it in how we eat, in how we think, in how we be. And really, the principles are really basic. And that's really what I learned on that island. I would swim every morning in the ocean. So get into the ocean and swim. And I would eat fruit and vegetables and things from the land and good olive oil and fresh organic food. and I would walk a lot. And then I would think and talk and practice things that were very stimulating. I was very honest about where I was emotionally. I was having very deep, interesting conversations with people interested in the same things as me. And I think the combination of very simple principles is really what health is about. Good food, exercise, good sleep, good community and connection. And it really comes down to that. And I mean, we learned obviously much more in depth principles of it on the island, but really what health comes down to is those things.
I mean, it does sound very idyllic to be living on an island like that and
Low
living that
stress.
yeah. But, I'm curious how you found 'cause on one hand, yeah, you have this experience on an island that is awesome, but on the other hand, it is still very much a small place. You're not talking about, like,
Hmm.
London or Vancouver. What was it
Hmm.
about the island that made it seems that even though it's a small place, but I'm sure, like, you mentioned how when you went back to South Africa, nothing had changed. I'm sure on this island, even fewer things changed in the
Hmm.
hundreds of years that have passed. What was it about that that made it okay, but in another situation, like a small community that doesn't change, was not what you're looking for?
I think for me, more so than the actual community or the lifestyle, and this is kind of what's driven me to live in America too, was a sense of freedom. And I think that was integral to, and it is integral to our happiness, I believe. And in South Africa, I didn't feel I had that freedom because the lifestyle was so restricted because there was so much crime. Also, within the community, I was raised within a very small community, so there wasn't much freedom to be anything other than what our community was. On the island, yes, it was small in terms of size and in terms of population, but I could still be and practice whatever I wanted to be. I still had the freedom as a woman and as a person to go around the island and the lifestyle and be whatever I wanted and do whatever I wanted, which I had in London too and in Vancouver. South Africa, it's just not safe to be that way. You can't drive alone as a woman or as a person. It's really dangerous at night. There's so much crime. We grew up with a lot of crime and you live with a lot of fear. And I think that you don't have in a lot of other places in the world. Certainly, whether it's a big city or a small island, there was no sense of fear that we had. And that was kind of, I think, the main difference.
And, how did that end? What happened next?
My parents moved to California. I, as a 24-year-old, ran out of money on the island and needed to go where my family were. So my sister and I both moved to California to be with our parents. There wasn't much more to that. They were there, they had immigrated. We thought I was ready to be with my family again. And California seemed like a great next step. I didn't know much about it. I hadn't been to LA before, and then moved to one of the biggest cities in the world after that.
Yeah, okay, so what was that like? What was it, like to be living in LA? What years was this?
This was moved to LA in 2002
Okay,
and left in 2016 to
okay.
come to Colorado. So it was exhilarating too, in a totally different way. You don't have the freedom of little, walking around in nature, but it's this huge, big city where you mostly drive. But it was at a time in my life where I was ready to be more established career wise. There was a lot of opportunity with that, and California offered that. My sister and I moved together and we got an apartment together, and that was amazing to be with her and to live with her for the first time in our lives as adults. And to be honest, I mean, we were partying a lot. It was really fun. It was a great city to have that and have the mix between work and fun, and my sister in an apartment was really great. It's a really great time.
And professionally, did you start your own company? You're an entrepreneur now. You've started a bunch of different things. How'd that come about?
So that actually came about when I moved to LA. I went back into uh, kind of what they call integrative pharmaceuticals. A chain had started in Colorado, actually, but there were branches in LA called Pharmaca. Since then, unfortunately, it's closed down, but they hired me both as a practitioner and a lead practitioner, and then also to do consulting. And they had compounded their pharmaceuticals as well as all the natural vitamins, supplements, herbs, lifestyle stuff. So it was a cross section of all the different things I'd studied. And I worked with them for about 7 years in LA as a consultant and as a practitioner. And at the same time, started building a private practice in LA. So I was doing both. So I got a sense of the business side through working with Pharmaca, and then the practice side, working, just building my own practice there. So I kind of started there before Colorado.
How did you find building your own practice? Did it come naturally to you? How did you get some of your first patients, clients?
No, that was really hard. I think that was one of the, I'm not sure that it's like this now, but in medicine, they don't really teach you the business side of building your own practice and how to do that. We certainly didn't get that education. We learned all the principles of health and the body and everything, and then you're pushed out into the world to kind of work it out on your own. So that part was tough in the first 2, 3 years, I would say, because especially then, I mean, this was in, I think, 2007, 2008. There wasn't social media. There wasn't, it was really just referral based and website based. So, I mean, I had a business partner who was a doctor, and the two of us built a practice together. And it was piece by piece, referral by referral. So it was boots on the ground. But I mean, we built, and in 3 years we had a practice, and we it was great. We joined with another clinic of other practitioners and kind of expanded from there. But it was something that we had to kind of bootstrap together.
What about the actual practice, the work that you were doing with your clients? How you already mentioned some of the principles, but I'm curious how you took some of these learnings from, including from one island in Greece, and applied it to the LA market. What did you find worked? Did it all resonate, or did you have to adjust some of the things for the Western audience?
Definitely had to adjust a lot. I think I went in really green and thinking like, oh, it's easy to make people healthy, and not realizing that the business side of it, you really do have to adjust models to what people need as well as what people expect. And I think when I started, functional medicine really wasn't as accepted as it is now. Within the last 2 years, there's been a huge explosion of the industry, and it's totally different now and much more accepted, but it was much more fringe when I started. So I had to really dial into what was available in terms of, from the pharmaceutical side, as well as to what people accepted. And it was a struggle because now people, it kind of comes a lot more naturally to think about what you're eating, to expect to take vitamins every day, to understand that there is a mental emotional component to our health and stress affects it. But back when I started, that wasn't as accepted. And people just wanted a pill to fix a symptom, but a pill that was natural. Now people see it much more as a lifestyle, and it's much easier now. But it was a push back then to try and adjust what I had learned to something that could just be given in a pill and a bottle and accepted and have follow through with people.
And okay, so talk more about the move to Denver, which is where you are now. How'd that come about?
Got married in LA. My husband was from Colorado and wanted to move. He wasn't happy with California, the size of it. We had a child, we had a baby, a son, and raising a son in California is really difficult. And he just wanted to be closer to his family and have Liam raised in a smaller environment and community and a more grounded community. So that happened in 2016. It was difficult because Denver at the time was a very different place to what it is now. It's grown a lot in the last, I would say, 5 years, but it felt much smaller then. And I was really used to the size of California, the speed of California, the accessibility to things. And coming here felt like a very small town compared to what LA is. It's changed a lot, as I said. I mean, now it feels much more like a big city, and the acceptance and accessibility to things, I would say, is even more progressive than California is, which I love. And especially in the industry that I'm in, and in the the profession I'm in, it's really, really accepted now and huge here. And I would say majority of people opt into my kind of medicine than not. And I think California is actually quite behind now, which is interesting how the dynamic shifted. But that's kind of how it happened.
What?
And
Why do
then
you, I'm just curious. Well, why do you say that California is behind Denver?
it's a lot more, there's a lot more restriction, I think, both in terms of legislation and in terms of perspective. I think here people in Colorado are really open-minded. They're very open to what's new and what could help in new and different ways. And California feels a lot less open in some ways. And I know that majority of people wouldn't agree with that, but I just find business wise, I find the way I practice, I find things in terms of how people think about things is much more open here.
And at what point did you start these other companies, the Milky Baby, the Formula, or the Anava Health? How did you think about expanding on the work that you were doing?
Well, with Milky Baby, so the majority of my practice now is, well, it's kind of half half adults and pediatric. And not many people practice pediatric functional medicine. So my practice is pretty strong in that area. And I had a patient come to see me who was pregnant, and this was 3 years ago. She didn't believe she'd be able to nurse her baby and wanted me to help her find formulas that were healthy for children and clean. I started looking into the different formulas that were available and realized that a lot of them didn't meet the standard of nutrition that I would prescribe for the majority of my patients. The ingredients weren't clean. They had a lot of things in them that I didn't agree with. And the proportion of the different proteins to carbohydrates, the oils in them, were not what I had learned fit with nutritional profiles. So I explained to her that I wasn't happy with any of the ones I found, that there were some in Europe that were much better if she wanted to import them, or she could go home and make her own. She was a VP of marketing of a company and laughed at me that I thought that she could make her own formula every week for her baby and had the time to do that. So she went away and she's like, no, I'll just research alternatives in Europe. But came back a couple weeks and said, would you want to found a company with me that we recreate an infant formula that's clean and healthy? At the time, I had no idea how difficult a category it is. And I thought, sure, I mean, why not? I'm happy to drum up a recipe and we can, build it and we can get it manufactured. And how hard can it be? It ended up being the most difficult category we possibly could have chosen in any business, and has been a beautiful challenge in that we've learned so much both about business, about CPG, about the market, about the FDA, so many different categories. We've learned a lot from it, but it's definitely been one of the more challenging businesses I could have chosen.
Do you have a sense of why the European formulas are better? I know we did that ourselves with our kids, but it was Frank and our wife's research that led us down that path. Yeah, I've heard that a lot, that the European ones are better. And then, but then the question is like, yeah, why aren't they sold in the US? Like, why is it so hard to actually get them here?
Well, the FDA has a very specific set of criteria, both in terms of manufacturing and in terms of the nutritional standards of what they expect in the US formulas, which restricts a lot of the European ones from being here. That said, the European ones are just as rigorous in their standards of what they expect from their formulas. They're just slightly different in terms of what they expect. So, for a European formula to come here, they have to re-register essentially with the FDA and go back to the beginning to get them reformulated, which is really, really expensive and difficult process. Now it's starting to loosen up. Actually, in the last 6 months, it's starting to loosen up a little bit. But up until then, it was very difficult to get them imported here. In terms of why they're better, the Europeans are much stricter with the ingredients that they put in their foods, in processed foods. For example, a lot of the oils that they use, they don't use a lot of vegetable and seed oils in the majority of their formulas, which in the US they feel are okay to use, and they do use them. That's one of the big differences. The other differences is that I think from a cost perspective, the US formulas don't add as many of the beneficial ingredients because it costs so much to do so. So they keep them kind of a little more minimal than some of the European ones, which add a lot more really healthy ingredients.
Hmm.
So just different standards.
And when you went down the path of creating your own, you mentioned it was very, very difficult. What's the gist of that? Is it getting the FDA approval at the end of the day that's
Mhm.
hard, or what makes it very difficult?
There's a few different categories. There's a few different reasons why. The first is that to introduce any single ingredient, you have to have a new clinical trial to prove that ingredient is GRAS, meaning it's safe. And GRAS is the acronym for generally regarded as safe by the FDA. So you have to go through a whole process, which is essentially a really expensive clinical trial to get GRAS approval for any new ingredient that you add or any change to a formula that's currently approved. So that's an expensive and very lengthy process to do that. The second thing is that,
And that's sorry on that piece. So if you want to make a formula that's got one ingredient in it that's different than what's on the shelves today, then
mhm,
you have to go through that GRAS
mhm,
process. Interesting. So
yeah,
basically, to innovate, to do any sort of innovation, to differentiate yourself from competition, you have to go through a very costly study.
yeah.
Interesting.
And that's why essentially most of the US formulas are recipes from the 90s, and there's been very little innovation because it is so expensive per ingredient to get a new ingredient accepted. It's like a 2-3 year process and maybe $5 to $8 million clinical trial per ingredient. So to innovate is very difficult. And then once you have that formula, then you have to actually test it on babies and have to have another clinical trial to prove that it's safe for babies.
And then is it that like once you go through that, can a competitor then just add that ingredient? Like if you went paid for
Yeah.
this, did everything, and then a competitor just
Uh-huh.
takes it.
So then it goes onto an FDA list of GRAS approved ingredients. If that ingredient you want to add it to your formula, you can, but then you've got to go through that clinical trial yourself with your current formula and the added ingredient to show that your formula with that new ingredient is safe for infants.
Wow. So, okay, so even though the ingredient is approved, you have to basically demonstrate that it doesn't have any side effects when combined with other ingredients
Exactly.
in your formula. Interesting.
So
Wow.
then that's from the formula point of view. Then from the manufacturing point of view, there are only basically 4 approved manufacturers in the US for infant formula, and all of them are owned by the big pharmaceutical companies. So if you want to be a newcomer to the space, to get your formula then manufactured is very, very difficult and limited. There's one manufacturer called Perigo that actually manufactures new formulas, but you have like giant minimum orders. You have to get into their production line, and it's very, very difficult as a new startup formula to get in that production. So there's so many barriers to entry that it's really, really difficult as an
Wow.
industry,
Wow. Okay.
which is why there's no innovation and why the formulas are still really outdated and old. And in Europe, they don't have a lot of those barriers.
It's fascinating. Okay, so that's Milky Baby. You've been doing it for a few years now, but then you also started another company a few months ago. Tell me more about that.
So it kind of was part of the Milky Baby story. We were raising our pre seed round to start our clinical trial. At the same time, there were a whole lot of changes within the FDA with the new administration that put out a new operation called Operation Stork Speed, where essentially the new administration mandated that the current formulas get cleaned up, which was really good for our industry. But as a startup, was a huge hindrance to us because now we didn't really have that edge of why we were different and coming into the market. So we decided to put our clinical trial. We didn't start our clinical trial because we wanted to see what was happening in the industry, because it might have been really hard to get into it now that all the big formulas are having to do this. So we waited, and in the process, my practice has grown a lot because functional medicine is exploding. And it's at a time now where it's a really exciting time where technology and science and essentially compassion have come to a cross section in the industry where we can use a lot of scientific data to analyze the body, where AI is really helping us analyze that and look into deeper ways of doing and seeing the body. And we've got a much more open and accepted understanding of mentally emotional impact on health. So I decided to use a lot of these principles currently in my practice, use AI a lot more, increase a lot of the data. So I use blood work, I use urine work, and I also have got very extensively into gut health and how gut health affects our health. And I was trying to find a way to process all this data I'm getting in a more efficient way using AI, and backed into and stumbled upon a way to implement that within my practice, and developed a platform that I use within my practice using all of those different metrics and AI and data and questionnaires that I've developed on my own, and decided to actually transform it and make it into a platform that I can release widely for other practices, B2B, other practices to use to help them increase their depth of knowledge and how they treat patients. So that's kind of Anava Health, which is essentially health operating system that I've developed.
What was that like? You're now selling, yeah, software technology into other businesses. It's very different than working on a CPG product. What are the learnings there? What'd you figure out?
I'm still figuring out that part. Essentially, what I've realized in all the different businesses is have good partners, have people who are experts in their different areas to help partner with me to do the things I want to do. I'm an expert in the health field and in the human body, essentially. And I have partnered with different people who are experts in either AI, in software technology, and now in sales to help me grow. Because none of those things, although I enjoy learning about them, none of them are things I want to actually do myself. So I've learned to reach out and develop partnerships with people that can help. Yeah, it's really what it is.
Do you find that in the adoption of AI and technology, like, does it come easy to other practices? Do they have questions? How do you sell essentially AI into the healthcare space?
So I am still in development. We haven't got to the place where we are selling it to other practices yet, because this is a 3-month-old project. So 3 to 6 month old project. I mean, the idea started 6 months ago, but the actual development started three. We have been beta testing it within my practice and using it, which has been incredible. And I think other practices, it depends on, I think, the people. But my view of it will be when they see how it expands what they can do and what they can see within their practice, it should be pretty easy. I think it's like introducing ChatGPT to people. At first, they're like, oh, I don't know AI. I don't know how to use AI. And the whole AI word is really intimidating. But when they actually realize it's just essentially a very advanced search engine where you stick in some terms and it really helps give you a broader knowledge or a broader view than their conventional searches used to do, they'll see how easily and well it can be adopted and how much it can expand their practices. And not even their practices, just how they see health, how they see the body, and how they treat people.
Yeah, I love the fact that you're developing this for yourself and getting those
Hmm.
insights and figuring out how that can work
Hmm.
for one company, which then makes it a lot easier to expand beyond that.
Thank you. And I think for me, it was twofold. It was a way to see people in a more in depth way. But from a business perspective, it was also how can I scale my practice? There was suddenly this huge demand in the last 2 years. Functional medicine's exploded. I wanted to expand and scale. And how could I do that in a quick but still efficient way and still treating people the way I wanted to, which was much more personalized, more in depth, giving them the time they deserved, but still scaling. And so it was kind of a cross section of both having the depth to be able to do it, having the tools, because AI's got so many tools now, and then having just the capability now to be able to.
Talk more about how functional medicine has expanded so much. I'm curious, like, why you think that is. Is it in response to things that are happening in the environment? Is it finally just an education thing that more people have learned about it? Well, what do you think? Why do you think now is the time when it's expanded so much?
It's been building, this movement has built over years. And I think it's a many different factors have led to the current explosion. I think people progressively have been disillusioned with how modern medicine is practiced and how there's very little connection or true care coming from their providers. I think is one aspect. You don't really have a relationship with your doctor, and your doctor doesn't really have much intimate knowledge of you or your family or your health or your case anymore. And I think that's not for any fault of theirs, but just for how things have been set up industry wise and with insurance and with how they're paid and with the hospital system and, how they're compensated. So I think it's kind of become that. And people are missing that connection with their providers that they feel they need, is one of the first things. The second thing, I think people weren't getting better and weren't feeling better. They had symptoms, for example, gastrointestinal symptoms or tummy aches, and they would take a medicine and not really feel much better or much different 2, 3 months ago. And in fact, things were getting worse. So people have started asking a lot more questions like, why am I not getting better? Why am I still sick? And started to seek for themselves answers that they weren't getting in conventional practices. And then I think people are also starting to realize because people generally as a population are becoming much healthier and they're starting to want to be healthier, exercise, pay attention to their nutrition. Mental health has become a lot more accepted as common practice. And I think the cross section of all those things has become a lot more accepted, but not within the conventional frame. So they're looking outside of that, like, oh, I want to wear a wearable because I want to track my sleep and I want to track how alcohol affects me. I want to take supplements because I want to help my body in different ways. I want to focus on my protein intake because I know it's going to help my workout. And when I work out, I sleep better and then my stress goes down. And they're starting to understand the cross section of all these different metrics essentially to help them get better. And conventional medicine wasn't really answering to that much. So I think functional medicine just kind of has been growing as an industry slowly. But now, with the intersection of wearables, of people taking their own health into their own hands, sites like Function Health, where people are getting their own blood work done and looking at much more extensive markers than just the conventional panel that most doctors run, and just wanting more answers essentially has kind of led to that. And then I think politically with the new administration, things have opened, no matter which side of the spectrum you fall, and it's unfortunate that it's become very politicized. I think right now in America with Kennedy in office, it's kind of expanded the acceptance of functional medicine. And whether people are against it or for it, it's certainly opened people's minds to the possibility of it being there, and maybe just even questioning, what's been common practice, like, is this right for me or isn't it? And I think that's been good for the industry because it's got people just thinking and asking more questions, questioning what's considered as normal or standardized. And it's just opened everything up.
I love that point about all these points, and starting with the first one around offering more services to patients and not
Hmm.
going into the doctor now. They don't know how to get rid of you more quickly because it's all about the volume that they're doing. And
Exactly.
historically, to your point, it's been much more about a relationship, a conversation. And there's some therapeutic value just in that and listening to somebody.
Exactly.
And let alone about the additional information that you're getting from asking them questions and remembering who they are.
Hmm.
I've seen that in other industries too, where like services are back, where in this world
Hmm.
of so much technology, so many things, and
Hmm.
that when you do get that personal attention from another human being, it's extremely valuable.
Hmm.
Companies can differentiate themselves by offering these types of services. So I think that's yeah, it's really, really interesting. I'm curious about the health benefits. Like if I came into your practice and I wanted to get healthier, what are some of the questions that you ask? What are some of the things, like some of the common mistakes that you find people making? So like the low hanging fruits that if someone changes one thing about their life, like what can it be to get them to be healthier?
I think the way I practice is really individualized. So there isn't kind of a one thing for all. But I mean, the way I start practicing is to really look at everybody's metrics. Before anybody sees me, they get a full blood panel done, which is about 120 different markers. The conventional panel is between 20 and about 20 markers. So I do about 150. I do a urine panel, which is a metabolic panel too. And then I also make sure all of them do a gut health test by a company called Tiny Health, because it's a really extensive gut microbiome test that really shows us everything that's happening in the gut, which is really where health begins from a physiological point of view, which is what I believe. So I get all those data points, and then I would sit with you and we have a 2 hour initial consultation where I go through your health history, starting from birth. So everything that's happened and major turning points in your life to see what's led you to this point, both in your symptoms and in who you are as a person. So kind of like you're doing on your podcast, but I do in a from a health point of view. And it's like detective work to me because I get to hear all about this person. I get to go through and understand really key things that affected, who they've become today, both from a health point of view and their outcome and their personality. And then I take all that information and use the data points from all their health metrics and put it all together to see where their imbalances are. I mean, low hanging fruit, I would say most people need vitamin D. Most people are deficient. And I think that the majority of that is because most people just don't spend time outside anymore. And if they had to spend 10 or 20 minutes just in the sun every morning and letting their eyes, see the sun, it would take care of a lot of that. But vitamin D, most people have a deficiency. I feel like most people are deficient in vitamin Bs or have methylating issues in vitamin Bs. So that's something else that's really common for most people, needing a B complex. And then most people don't get good omegas. And that kind of goes back to the Greek island where people would, eat olive oil and fish and eat a lot of really good omegas. Today, people are really deficient in good omega 3s and omegas in general. So, I mean, those are probably the three most common that people need. And then within the American diet, I mean, I think there isn't much of a balance diet wise. People are either really focused on carbohydrates if they're not very healthy, or they're overly focused on protein these days. And there isn't really much of a balance of protein, carbohydrates, and fiber, which is really the healthiest combination to me. And again, that's the Mediterranean diet, essentially, is what it comes down to, is a good combination of protein, good fats, and carbohydrates. So essentially, it's getting people to realize that and teaching that. And then walking is really what most people need. Walking and some, lifting weights 2, 3 times a week for, you know, 10 to 40 minutes. And that's kind of my whole practice is teaching those principles essentially.
And is it so weights in particular, like weightlifting,
Mhm.
versus cardio or other things? Like I've been hearing that there's a resurgence in weightlifting. Like, say more about that.
To me, it's kind of a combination. You've got to have the cardio, so walking or running pretty much daily. So people tracking their steps every day. I say, getting a minimum of or a maximum, well, an average of 10,000 steps a day is really important. But weightlifting is really key for many different parts of our body, for strength, for how the body functions, for muscles, for sleep, for mentally emotional. Lifting weights really affects our whole physiology on every level. A lot of people don't do that inherently. So lifting heavy weights would be a hard place for them to start. But I say even just home weights of a basic home weight routine of even 10 pounds, 10 to 20 pounds, 3 times a week would be a really, really great place to start. And then building from there. And obviously, the more and the heavier you do, the better it would be for your body. But it really is key to do that 2, 3 times a week.
And so you mentioned you do all this testing in the beginning. Do you also test throughout over time to see how these markers are changing? Like how do you, yeah, how often do you keep collecting data?
So, on average, every 6 months, I retest. The full testing, full blood testing, I do in the beginning, which is 120 markers. And then 6 months later, I test 60 markers, which are the key upper markers, depending on each case. The gut health, it depends on what results come back. I mean, it can, if people have gut health issues, I like to test every 3 months. But if they're generally healthy and I just wanted to get a baseline of where they're at, I'll do it once a year, the gut health testing. But yeah, you definitely have to retest. And I like to, on average, test, the first 6 months of everything because it shows us what's working, what's not, what we're improving, what we need to focus in on. And it just gives us a kind of foundation of what's happening.
And in terms of the other, like just visits to come see you, how does that work? How often do people come in? How does that relationship change over time?
I think, as I said, I mean, I practice in a very individualized way. Some people come in generally pretty healthy and just want a one off consultation. Just, create a program for me. I just want, I want to round off the edges essentially. But the majority of people that come to me are really unhealthy and they usually come after trying everything else. So, a way down the line. In those cases, depending on their data and what they have, I like to see them probably once a month or once every 6 weeks. And I definitely say give it 3 months. So do a 3 month program. Let's see within 3 months if we can get you to a better baseline. And if you want to go off from there and just have kind of a maintenance program, that's great. But definitely give it on average 3 to 6 months. But I mean, the way I gauge it is I take however long they've had a symptom and halve that number and then make it into months. So if they've had a symptom for 10 years, I say, okay, well, then it's going to take probably about 5 months to get that better because you've had it for so long. So take it in half, the 10 years in half, and obviously that's not any kind of science, but it kind of gives them an idea of how long they've got to commit to something like this.
What are do you do any of this stuff remotely or is it all in person? How's that part work?
It's all majority of my practice, thanks to COVID, is actually telemedicine now. Luckily, all the testing they can either get done locally where they are at a Quest or a LabCorp. The gut health test is an order I send to them, and it's an at-home test. So they just create an order and they get it sent to their home. And I mean, I prefer face to face. It's really good to build connection with people. So a lot of my practice is in Colorado, but I see people all over the world. And I never, that wasn't possible before COVID, but now we have amazing telemedicine. HIPAA compliant sites that we use. And people are pretty used to telemedicine now and accept it. So at least it's much better than just on the phone or not at all.
Yeah. You also mentioned that you do a lot of work in pediatrics. How does that part of it work out? And you also said that there aren't that many people that do work with children in this space. Yeah, I'm curious. Like, have you found that even within your own kids, like, have you found that if you get them developing these healthy habits earlier, that it ends up being easier for them to do this as an adult?
Yeah, I mean, I've really developed the pediatric part of my practice for two reasons. The first is that it's so much easier to correct imbalances when people are young that are then impart them for the rest of their lives. So it's much easier and better to have that change from a early age. And then secondly, it's so much easier to treat kids both from a point of view in that they haven't got that much complication and it's much easier to correct a lot of their imbalances because it's not that complicated. And secondly, when they can talk, they're just much more honest than adults. So I get to really understand what's going on with them from a much more upfront, honest point of view. They'll tell you how they're feeling, right away. You know exactly what's happening. Whereas adults tend to filter things a lot more. So it takes it's a longer process for them to trust, I think. But how it works with kids is that I get a case history. I don't do any of the blood work, and I just do the gut health work because the majority of kids' imbalance comes from gut health. Which is why I partnered with this company called Tiny Health because they started their gut health testing in pediatrics and with infants. They've expanded it now to all populations and all demographics, but it started with children's health. And it was really innovative to have a test that could be used on children that's non invasive. It's a stool test. It's really easy to do at home. And you stick it back in the test tube, and it gives you a full, really comprehensive view of what's happening with them. And then from there, building programs that are supplement and diet based are much simpler than with adults. And usually within 3 to 6 months, they're balanced and healthy, and it sets their immunity and their systems for the rest of their lives. And usually then it's just little tweaks here and there, but they're healthy after that. I mean, the majority of the work is training the parents to impart the changes, is the biggest thing, you know?
Yeah. I wonder, you mentioned that the Mediterranean diet is a big part of the nutritional advice that you give. Thinking back to your grandma that was sneaking in meat into your food as a kid, like, do you feel like there's, I don't know, how do you think about that? How do you think about these, like, traditions, and they didn't have a lot of or any science to back some of the things that they were doing, but they still stumbled into certain recipes and foods that end up being healthy. Yeah, like, reflecting back on your life and your Greek heritage, how does all that come together?
I think the biggest culprit of people who are unhealthy is essentially the processed food industry. And the more food has become industrialized, the worse people's health has become. And I think essentially what a Mediterranean diet is non processed, organic, healthy food in a balanced way. As I said, there's fats from healthy oils and fish. There's protein that's not industrialized, meaning that it's organic and grass fed and from the earth. And then there's vegetables that are grown in the earth and organic, and grains also that are not processed. So I think for me, it's not really the type of diet, whether it's keto or high protein or paleo or all these buzzwords that we use, but more the kind of food that we use and to not have processed food. So to step away from anything in the middle of the grocery section, I say, and just focus on the outside of the grocery store, which is essentially the non-processed food versus the processed food. And I try to teach people just to avoid those middle aisles because that's where everything from a factory comes, and to focus on anything that actually ate from the earth or grows in the earth is really what it comes down to. And I think our ancestors, including Greek food, is really just that. Mediterranean food is non processed food. And really, the only processed food is bread that they have. And the grains that they use were organic and non GMO and just, made and processed in a very different way to how wheat and grains are processed in the Western world. So it's really just those principles and then kind of tailoring it to where people are in their lives because the majority of people these days, especially in our Western world, eat very processed food. So it's getting them to relearn and unthink what they've been taught is okay and trying to show them how it's not and how it affects their body, how it affects their gut, what it's doing to them long term, how it then affects their immune system, and just teaching them. But really, I mean, our ancestors just ate simple, organic, non processed. Yeah. Yeah.
It's maybe a good place to end this conversation is thinking about the future. And you already talked about AI and the ability to do this at larger scale. But maybe, yes, say more about where you hope that the next decade or a couple of decades can take us and how we've come a long way, but there's still a lot of to grow. And curious anything about this intersection of technology, education, combined with these ageless techniques and this in-person conversation and where that can lead us.
I think to me, for me personally, I know a lot of people disagree with me, but for me personally, it's a really exciting time because a few things are happening. I mean, we've got this explosion of ability within technology to grow and learn. Then we've got a much deeper understanding of how health works and where it comes from. And we have people who are taking autonomy in their own selves and in their health and not just trusting what's been told to them is true. So, having that combination where people are able to use technology, take things into their own hands, take their own health, their own lives, their own futures into their own hands, and then mix it with a lot of really amazing data out there that can help us advance is really exciting to me. I think the one issue where we have to be careful in general as humans and in life and in business and in politics is losing the connection and losing the compassion and losing the curiosity around humans, which could easily happen with this cross section that's happening. And I think as technology becomes more available to us, it's still being able to use it like you and I are now to connect, to understand each other, to have curiosity around each other, to try and learn more from somebody in a totally different way. That's really the key that I think we have to still maintain going forward. And I think that's probably the biggest challenge we in the human race is to maintain that connection because I feel we get more and more disconnected rather than connected, even though we have this ability and these tools and AI and data points to be able to use it. So for me, that's really what my motivation is to try and use all these tools we have and this technology we have, but maintain the connection and the curiosity and the openness around what's different.
Speaking of connection, what should people do if they want to reach out to you and learn more about what you're doing?
I have a website. It's denverihealth.com. They can reach me through there. They can learn more about my practice there. I'm not very good at social media. I haven't very good at putting myself out there. So that's not one of my strong points. But definitely through that, they can email me. They can reach out through my phone number too. That's helpful. I have an office that they can reach out to. But my website's probably the best place.
That's awesome. I don't know if you can tell from some of these questions, but I too am interested in the things that you're talking about. I think it's really cool to learn more about it. And yeah, I definitely a believer in more of this customized medicine. I was actually my brother is a physician. I was talking to him just this week about some company I'm considering an investment in, and the general premise is that what would you do as a doctor if you had access to an order of magnitude more data, or maybe even more of data on people, where you
Hmm.
can get like, blood work instead of every year, you can get it every month, and you track instead of 20 things, you track 150 things, right? And,
Hmm.
and you get all these metrics that I do think, and one of the points that he made is like, that would be so hard because I would not have time to be able to look at all this
Hmm.
stuff, which that on its own, kind of going back to your point that it requires more technologies, it requires a different way of doing things. But it would be awesome, right? To be able to have
Hmm.
all this data on people, and then having somebody that can then help you interpret it and make decisions that are customized to your specific profile.
Hmm.
So it's yeah, I definitely am a believer in this. I think this is the direction that healthcare is going in.
Thank you. Yeah, it's really exciting for me because I see how limited physicians and practitioners are time wise and resource wise, and just availability and information, and being able to bring it all together now is a very exciting thing for me.
Yeah, no, yeah,
Yeah.
you're obviously in a great spot to be part of this whole movement. Well, Nina, thank you so much for speaking with me today. It was amazing to learn more about your life story and what you're doing.
Thanks, Matei, and thanks for your curiosity. Thanks for being open to it. It's amazing what you're doing and just opening, you know, channels to all different kinds of people and their stories. I really appreciate it.